you want to know?
What's going on, people? Myke ctown here with another episode of What Do You Want to Know, where you ask your questions. If I like your question, I answer your questions on camera. So yeah, it's been a while since I've done a What Do You Want to Know question video. Sorry, I've been kind of busy, and that's caused my channel to get very stagnant. But hopefully I will be fixing that very soon. But today's question comes from Mariah Jackson, and she asks, "You've talked about your experience with hardcore many times. I'm only 21, so I grew up on more of the modern hardcore. I know of some of the older bands, but I don't know many people who grew up during that time. So can you give me a list of some of your favorite hardcore bands of that era? Thanks, Duder." Hey, Mariah, thanks for the question. But before I get into it, am I the only one that anytime they hear the name Mariah, they immediately inside of their head go, "Me and Mariah, going back like babies and pacifiers"? Like, I cannot be the only one, but if I am, that's fine, whatever. Fuck y'all. So yeah, I came up on 90s hardcore. I did listen to a lot of the old school 80s stuff as well, but I was way more into the heavier 90s stuff. So for this video, I'm going to talk about the 90s stuff that I was really into, the stuff that affected me the most and stayed with me into adulthood. And depending on how I feel about this one, I may do another video talking about some of the old school 80s, like youth crew stuff that I was also into. But yeah, I'm not going to give a ton of information on these releases. If you're interested in any of them, just do your Googles. Alright, so let's get started. At number 10, we're going to go with Damnation, No More Dreams of Happy Endings. This is a super underrated album to me by a hardcore band from DC. Like, it's such a great, super heavy hardcore album with these really interesting industrial influences. Like, the guitars sound so good. They were chunky, but they had this sound and this tone that no other hardcore band that I know of had. Like, even the cover of the album was rad and dark and creepy. They released albums after this, but none of them touched this one to me. Number 9, we're going with Overcast, Expectational, Dilution. This is a really interesting band from Boston. A lot of New Jacks will know of them because of the singer, Brian. He joined Shadows Fall after being in this band. But Overcast was a great metal hardcore band, and the interesting thing about this album is it's basically a bunch of Slayer riffs with hardcore breakdowns tossed in, but it's done in a much different way than any of these like modern metalcore bands do it. Brian was using this mixture of clean and rough vocals, but the clean, they weren't like this weird emo melodic shit. Like, they were really dark. This was long before he was talking about Rastafarianism. Like, the lyrics on this shit, they're evil to the point where I really wondered if these guys were actually into Satan. At number 8, we're going with Converge, Petitioning the Empty Sky. Everyone knows Converge, but typically everyone talks about fucking Jane Doe. And Petitioning the Empty Sky is Converge's second album, and this is, to me, when their sound started to shift. Like, they became more frantic, more chaotic, more metallic, but this album also has some, like, kind of really cool emo influences a bit. Like, there's a lot of diversity on this album, and best of all, you could still hear what was going on, unlike what they're doing now. And in my opinion, this is the album that influenced probably 50% of the metallic hardcore bands of this era. Like, a lot of people were fucked up when this album dropped, and everyone wanted to start playing like these guys. Number 7, Bloodlet, Entheogen. Super heavy hardcore from Orlando, Florida. You know, I really don't like sludge metal, but these guys killed. And I mentioned sludge metal because while they weren't purely sludge metal, it was closer to that than the typical hardcore of the time. Like, the riffs were intricate and heavy, really slow, the drums were detailed, and the vocals were just ugly, man. Like Overcast, they had some of the most twisted lyrics. They had a song about killing someone and dressing up in her skin, which is my favorite song on this album, believe it or not. I did a review of this album on my channel, so if you want more details on it, go watch that, or just go listen to the album. Number 6, Starkweather, Into the Wire. This was another one of those bands that, to me, was more of a metal band than they were a hardcore band. Like, they were total outsiders as far as I could tell. No other band in hardcore sounded like them. The music was super heavy, chunky guitars, great drumming, and absolutely incredible vocals. Rennie, the singer, had this amazing singing voice, as well as this scream that sounded like he was in immense pain. The lyrics all dealt with things like self-doubt, self-loathing, self-hate, but not in a corny fucking My Chemical Romance mall goth kind of way, but in a far more real sense. Like, I think the lyrics could really be read as a poetry book the same way they could be read as song lyrics. But yeah, these guys are still going today and still doing ridiculously heavy metal hardcore. At number 5, gotta go with Earth Crisis, Firestorm. You know, what is there to say about Firestorm, man? If you call yourself a hardcore kid and you haven't heard this EP, then you need to have your card revoked. This EP changed my world when I heard it back in 1993. The simplistic but super heavy riffs, the vocals were just so good, and the lyrics about rounding up drug dealers, but also the plight of Native Americans, and most of all, veganism, you know, really spoke to high school me. And it's the song Eden's Demise on this EP that actually made me go vegan. And when I put this album on, to this day, I still get unnecessarily hype. Like, this album is just so important to my adolescence. Number 4, Unbroken, Life.Love.Regret. Any best of hardcore albums list that doesn't have this album would be completely invalidated in my mind. Unbroken was a San Diego hardcore band that was one of the first bands to play metallic hardcore the way that they did. Again, Slayer riffs in the guitars, but they were super heavy. They were played different than Overcast, the other band that I mentioned previously. And this band, Unbroken, God, amazing lyrics. You can feel every single word that's sung here. Songs about darkness, depression, that really spoke to a lot of kids back then because, again, they were so real. Like, yeah, this album is a must-hear if you haven't heard it already. But for those of us that grew up in the 90s scene, this album was a fucking staple. Number 3, Chokehold, Content with Dying. Chokehold was a vegan straight edge band from Ottawa, Canada that was the epitome of PC in the 90s. Like, their songs were about anti-fascism, they were pro-gay, pro-woman, pro-choice, pro-vegan, you know, and the best part of this album was how raw it was. It sounded like it was recorded in a backyard, but to us, it sounded fucking fantastic, man. It was fast, it was heavy at times, it was sloppy as shit, but it was so punk rock at its core, and it shaped the way I saw politics and social awareness at that time. And to this day, I still have a lot of the same views that I had back then. You know, views that Chokehold helped instill. And yes, I know of the events that happened with them kind of recently, but we're not going to get into that here. Alright, these next 2 albums, depending on my day and depending on my mood, they could be totally flip-flop for number 2 and for number 1. But, this week, number 2 is Catharsis, Samsara. Catharsis was a band from North Carolina that I found through a comp that I got probably back in 1993 or 94, and I really loved them, but when they released this album, it seriously fucked my world up, man. I hadn't heard anything as intense as this. It's fast, it's intricate, it's metal, it's hardcore, it's punk as fuck. Like, some of the most interesting guitar work that I'd heard from any band of that era is on this album, and the drumming is absolutely insane. And, you know, you can hear that these guys had influences from crust punk like Amoebics or His Heroes Gone to metallic hardcore like Integrity, and even stuff like Gizm. But if you have not heard this album because it's very, very, very under talked about, please do yourselves a favor and go check this out. Alright, for my favorite number 1 hardcore album of the 90s, it's gotta be Integrity, Those Who Fear Tomorrow. I can still remember when I first heard this album. I can still remember picking it up and being like, what is this? This looks really cool. I'm gonna buy it. You know, I didn't know what to make of it when I first heard it, but I knew I enjoyed it. But as time went along, man, I fell in love with this album. Integrity, for those of you guys that don't know, is a hardcore band from Cleveland, Ohio that played super dark and what was referred to as Holy Terror hardcore. Like, it was really groundbreaking stuff at the time. Heavy hardcore with a vocalist that had one of the most interesting and intense voices. In my opinion, it's the perfect metal hardcore album. You know, it was still a hardcore album at its core, but it was way more metal than anything that had come before it. More than Leeway, more than Cro-Mags, you know? There was something truly dark and sinister with this album, and the fact that it came out in 1991, it just blows me away, man. And I still listen to this album on a regular basis. The riffs are what keep me coming back, man. These riffs, these incredible solos. The Melnick brothers were just a force to be reckoned with, and Dwid's vocals and lyrics were just crazy, man. Crazy is the only word I can think of to describe them. But yeah, this is an amazing album that I would hope that most of you guys have already heard. But yeah, I'm gonna stop there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this list. I know I should not have to say this, but this is my list. This is not your list. If you don't agree with my list, that's totally fine. Make sure you drop your list in the comment section down there so I can judge you the way that you're probably judging me. Once again, thank you, Mariah, for the question. And if any of you guys have any other questions that you'd like me to answer in one of these videos, make sure you email them to ctownwdywk@gmail.com. And that's it. As usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you. And I'll see you guys next time. All right? Peace, bitches.